Germany, a cinematic landscape of pristine alpine peaks, orderly cobblestone streets, and echoing medieval castles where the world believes time stands perfectly still. Forget the traditional postcards because the true engine of Europe operates in relentless overdrive. 84 million citizens fuel a decentralized, highly complex industrial juggernaut. Hamburg alone processes over 8 million TEU shipping containers annually. The Ruhr Valley transforms from a coal-choked basin into a billion-euro green technology epicenter. This is the third largest economy on Earth, a massive, heavily fragmented powerhouse strictly divided into 16 fiercely independent federal states. 99% of its legendary export strength hides quietly within unstoppable rural factory towns. Prepare to shift your perspective completely. Our descent into the unfiltered mechanical reality of Germany begins right now. Erase the postcard. The world shares a collective hallucination about this country. Deep green alpine valleys, men in leather trousers, women in dirndls, giant 1-liter glass mugs of beer. That is not Germany, that is Bavaria. One single state in the deep south, exporting an aesthetic that swallowed an entire national identity. To understand this land, you must first break it apart. 16 distinct states, 16 parallel universes. The Federal Republic of Germany operates completely decentralized. There is no single cultural heart. Bavaria alone holds 13 million people, proud, Catholic, alpine, travel 800 kilometers north to Schleswig-Holstein, flat plains, wind-whipped coastlines. Deep Protestant roots. Here, they drink corn, a clear grain spirit, and eat pickled herring. They do not consider themselves Bavarian. They barely consider themselves the same nationality. The Romans built the Limes Wall here 2,000 years ago. South of the wall, wine and Catholicism. North of the wall, beer and Protestantism. The ancient cultural scar never fully healed. Listen closely to the streets. A harsh guttural sound in the deep south, the rolling melodic sh of Swabian speakers in Stuttgart, a sharp, clipped Low German or Plattdeutsch echoing near the Danish border. A farmer in rural Bavaria speaking deep Boorish cannot hold a conversation with a fisherman in Bremen. They physically cannot understand each other. They rely on High German, a standardized language, just to communicate across domestic borders. This extreme linguistic fragmentation is a historical stubbornness. Before 1871, there was no Germany, just a chaotic mosaic of 39 independent kingdoms, duchies, and city-states. Bavaria had its own king, Saxony had its own military, Prussia dominated the map. When Otto von Bismarck finally stitched them together, the regional pride refused to die. Today, the federal constitution protects this division. Article 30 dictates that the states hold the true power. Berlin does not dictate education. Bavarian schools teach a completely different curriculum than schools in North Rhine-Westphalia. Police forces answer to state capitals, not the federal chancellery. Media broadcasting is fiercely regionalized. WDR rules the West, NDR controls the North, BR broadcasts for the South, North Rhine-Westphalia forms the industrial West. 18 million people live here, the most populous state. A dense cluster of cities bleeding into one another. Cologne, Dusseldorf, Dortmund, 10 million people living in a continuous urban sprawl with no clear borders. Then look east, Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, only 1.6 million people, vast lakes, empty forests. The population density drops from 530 people per square kilometer in the west to just 69 in the northeast. The cultural whiplash is violent. You cross a state line and the laws change. In Catholic Bavaria, dancing is legally banned on Good Friday. Nightclubs are forced to shut off their music. Drive 3 hours north to a Protestant state and the clubs operate normally. Augsburg, a city in Bavaria, holds a legal public holiday exclusive to its city limits. The Peace Festival on August 8th. Nowhere else celebrates it. No single city claims absolute cultural dominance. No single dialect reigns supreme. The Bavarian illusion sells millions of flights every October. Over 6 million people flock to Munich for the Oktoberfest. They consume 7 million liters of beer. They buy the merchandise. They take the photos. Outside the Munich city limits, the real engine operates on a completely different frequency, a highly compartmentalized society. 16 unique gears turning simultaneously, Follow the money. In France, all roads lead to Paris. In the United Kingdom, London swallows the wealth, the talent, and the power. Germany rejects this design entirely. Wealth is strictly, deliberately distributed. Berlin is the political capital. It houses the Bundestag and 3.8 million residents. For decades, it was famously described by its own mayor as poor but sexy, until exactly 2018, Berlin actually dragged down the national GDP per capita, a capital city operating at an economic deficit, an anomaly in Europe. The true financial muscle flexes hundreds of kilometers away. Head 500 kilometers southwest to Frankfurt, the state of Hesse. A skyline of steel and glass rising abruptly from the plains. The locals call it Manhattan. The European Central Bank sits here. The Deutsche Bundesbank operates here. Frankfurt Airport moves 2 million tons of cargo annually. It is the undisputed financial vein of the continent. Now drive 400 kilometers north to Hamburg, a sovereign city-state, the maritime giant. No skyscrapers, just cranes. The port of Hamburg handles 8 million TEU containers a year. It dominates trade with Asia and the Americas. Hamburg boasts one of the highest densities of millionaires in the country, a wealth built on shipping lines, global logistics, and fierce Hanseatic independence. Turn your gaze south. Baden-Württemberg, Stuttgart, nestled in a tight valley, choked with traffic. This is the absolute core of the global combustion engine. Mercedes-Benz and Porsche run their global operations from here. The state generates a GDP of over 570 billion euros. If Baden-Württemberg were a sovereign nation, its economy would eclipse Sweden or Belgium. Next door, Bavaria answers with its own corporate giants. Munich is not just beer and pretzels. It is the headquarters of BMW, Siemens, or Allianz. Bavaria's GDP routinely shatters the 700 billion euro mark, matching the entire economic output of Saudi Arabia. Look at the DAX 40, the top corporate index. The headquarters are scattered across 22 different cities, not stacked in a single financial district. This extreme economic distribution creates the true superpower. If a financial crisis hits the banking sector, Frankfurt bleeds. But Stuttgart keeps building cars. If global supply chains choke maritime trade, Hamburg suffers. But Munich keeps writing insurance policies and coding software. 16 individual economies acting as a synchronized shock absorber. Even the media landscape refuses centralization. The major newspapers are scattered across the map. The Süddeutsche Zeitung prints in Munich. The Frankfurter Allgemeine publishes in Frankfurt. Der Spiegel investigates from Hamburg. No single city dictates the national conversation. The talent does not drain into one megacity. A brilliant engineer does not need to move to Berlin to build a career. They can earn a six-figure salary in a town of 100,000 people in the Black Forest. This distributed power grid frustrates foreign investors. They land in Berlin expecting the center of everything. They find politicians and startups. They must travel to Waldorf, a town of 15,000 people, to find SAP, Europe's largest software company. They must travel to Herzogenaurach, population 24,000, to find the global headquarters of Adidas and Puma. A nation designed to prevent total collapse by preventing total control, a web of regional titans. Forget the Alps, forget the fairy tale castles of the south. Turn your back on the romanticized mountains and look strictly north. The Baltic Sea, cold, unforgiving, grey water crashing against flat, sandy shores. Here lies a ruthless empire of trade. In the highly volatile 14th century, a massive fleet of wooden cogs departs the port of Lübeck. Their exact destination: the icy docks of Novgorod in Russia, the steep, freezing fjords of Bergen in Norway, and the muddy, crowded banks of the Thames in London. They carry pure salt mined from Lüneburg. They carry thousands of barrels of Baltic herring. They return loaded with Russian furs and high-grade English wool. They do not answer to kings. They do not answer to emperors. They answer exclusively to merchants. This is the Hanseatic League, a medieval mega-corporation dominating Northern Europe from 1356 until the late 17th century. The South built lavish palaces for royals. The North built massive fortified warehouses for sheer profit. Absolute pragmatism over romanticism. Wealth measured entirely in cargo holds and shipping manifests, not in crown jewels. Walk the streets of Wismar today, a UNESCO World Heritage Site recognized strictly in 2002, you will find no delicate marble here, no intricate Renaissance frescoes, just raw, baked red clay. Brick Gothic architecture. Millions of individual bricks baked in massive industrial-scale kilns, stacked into colossal monuments of commercial wealth. Look at St. Mary's Church in Stralsund. For centuries, this was the absolute tallest building on Earth at 151 meters, officially completed in 1478. It was not commissioned by a monarch, it was built directly by merchants, funded by the local trading guild, a giant 151-meter middle finger pointing at the traditional aristocracy. The Hanseatic merchants controlled the absolute wealth of the entire Baltic region. They levied heavy taxes, they funded mercenary armies, they waged direct naval wars against the King of Denmark in 1368 and decisively won. The subsequent Treaty of Stralsund in 1370 cemented their absolute, untouchable monopoly. This region is not a sleepy fairy tale setting. It is the literal birthplace of modern corporate warfare. The key cities of Lübeck, Rostock, Wismar, and Stralsund formed a heavily fortified, highly lucrative trading axis. A vast, interconnected network of over 200 cities stretching across what are now 7 modern European countries. They standardized sea routes. They issued their own binding corporate laws. The Lübeck Law governed municipal and trade life for over 100 cities scattered around the Baltic coast. Look closely at the Marienkirche in Lübeck, the mother church of brick Gothic, constructed heavily between 1450 and 1350. Its central nave soars an astonishing 38.5 meters high, the highest brick vault in the world. It took an estimated 16 million individual bricks to construct this single building. No natural stone quarries existed in this flat, sandy, coastal region. The merchants simply adapted. They dug the clay, they fired the massive kilns, they engineered their own synthetic mountains, stand in front of the Holstentor in Lübeck, completed in 1464. Thick, heavy brick walls sinking slowly into the soft northern soil over centuries. It looks exactly like a military fortress. It is actually a grand, intimidating entrance designed specifically for foreign merchants, a loud architectural statement of untouchable credit ratings. Right next to the River Trave sit the massive salt storehouses, built throughout the 16th century. Salt was the white gold of the medieval era. It preserved the herring. It fed the entire continent during brutal winters. The entire economy of the north ran completely on this relentless, highly unromantic logistics chain. The workhorse of this chain was the Kog, a broad, single-masted ship capable of carrying 90 tons of heavy cargo. By the year 1400, over 1,000 of these specific ships navigated the perilous, unpredictable Baltic waters. No GPS, no diesel engines, just raw canvas sails, brutal northern winds, and precise navigational charts. The merchants of Rostock traded beer. The famous Rostock beer, exported in massive quantities as far as Scandinavia in the 15th century. Liquid bread for the working masses. In exchange, they imported raw, heavy iron from Sweden, a perfect, ruthless cycle of supply and demand. Every single brick laid in the north tells a brutal story of profit margins, calculated risks, and shipping manifests. You don't find sleeping beauties in these coastal towns. You find ancient ledger books, that ruthless 14th century trading route. It never died. It simply evolved. The wooden cogs are entirely gone. The exact same maritime arteries now pump the lifeblood of modern globalized industry. Today, the Baltic and North Sea coasts serve as an amphitheater of extreme heavy-duty modern logistics. Welcome to the Hanse Sail in Rostock. Every single August, the past violently collides with the present. Over 1 million visitors flood the city harbor in a matter of days. Over 250 traditional sailing ships converge on the water. Massive, imposing four-mast giants like the Russian bark Sedov, 117 meters of forged steel and canvas. The Krusenstern towering nearby. Historic windjammers slicing heavily through the Baltic waves. But do not mistake this for a merely nostalgic parade. It is a highly calculated flex of enduring, unbroken maritime heritage. Just beyond the historic inner harbor, the modern industrial titans take over completely. The port of Rostock handles nearly 30 million tons of commercial freight annually. Massive roll-on, roll-off ferries departing continuously for Gedser in Denmark and Trelleborg in Sweden. The exact same geographic destinations the Hanseatic merchants heavily targeted 600 years ago. Only now, instead of salt and fur, they carry precision industrial machinery, volatile chemicals, and thousands of commercial trucks. The Baltic remains one of the most densely packed, busiest shipping lanes on the entire planet. Over 2,000 large commercial ships navigate these specific waters at any given moment. A relentless 24/7 conveyor belt of global commerce that refuses to stop moves sharply west toward the North Sea. The water turns significantly darker. The coastal winds grow violent. Here, the raw pragmatism of the North reaches its absolute undisputed peak. The romanticized green hills and solar panels of the South cannot possibly power a heavy industrial nation alone. The North Sea does. Look directly at the horizon off the coast of Borkum. Massive steel pillars driven 40 meters deep into the unforgiving ocean floor. The offshore wind parks. Alpha Ventus, Germany's very first offshore wind farm, fully activated in 2010. Today, it has triggered a vast towering forest of extreme turbines. The numbers are staggering. Over 1,500 offshore wind turbines currently spin in German waters right now, producing over 8 gigawatts of pure, uninterrupted power. These are not the quaint wooden windmills of a classic Dutch painting. These are colossal, terrifying feats of modern engineering. Consider the Siemens Gamesa 14222DD turbine. Its massive rotor diameter spans exactly 222 meters. A single fiberglass blade stretches 108 meters. Significantly longer than a professional soccer field, sweeping an insane area of 39,000 square meters with a single, massive rotation. One rotation generates enough electricity to power an average household for 2 full days. This is the new, highly lucrative white gold of the North Wind. The heavy infrastructure required to capture it is brutal. Heavy lift jack-up vessels like the Sea Installer, capable of carrying thousands of tons of raw steel, battle the severe North Sea swells just to install these giants. The power generated travels immediately through high-voltage direct current submarine cables. Hundreds of kilometers of thick copper wire buried deep under the harsh seabed. Projects named Borwin 1, Siltwin 1. Massive yellow offshore converter stations acting as giant electrical hearts, pumping raw power directly into the southern industrial basins. The massive automotive factories of Stuttgart and Munich demand endless, reliable energy. The harsh, deeply unromantic north provides it. Shift focus quickly to Wilhelmshaven, the Jade Weather port. Officially opened in 2012, Germany's only deep-water container port, specifically engineered to handle the world's largest ultra-large container vessels. Ships stretching 400 meters long, carrying up to 24,000 TEUs, dock here effortlessly regardless of the ocean tide. It is an extreme, highly calculated display of heavy maritime infrastructure. Nearby, Bremerhaven completely dominates the global automotive trade, the largest closed automobile hub in the entire world. Over 1.7 million vehicles pass through its massive terminal every single year. Endless, highly secured rows of brand new cars waiting to be loaded directly onto massive ro-ro carriers bound for Asia and the Americas. The ancient merchants of the 14th century captured the harsh coastal winds to move their heavy cargo across the Baltic. The engineers of the 21st century captured those exact same winds to power the entire nation's electrical grid. The tools changed completely, the massive scale multiplied, but the ruthless, highly pragmatic northern ambition remained exactly the same. Look at the skyline, the narrow cobblestone streets, the majestic soaring spires. It feels incredibly ancient. It looks centuries old, but it is a beautifully crafted illusion. In May 1945, Germany did not have a historic skyline. It had a graveyard. Take Cologne. By March 1945, 95% of the historic inner city is completely gone. The city endures 262 separate air raids, 34,700 tons of heavy bombs drop from the sky. The majestic Cologne Cathedral stands entirely alone, heavily damaged, sitting in a vast, silent desert of pulverized concrete and twisted steel. Look at Hamburg, July 1943. Operation Gomorrah, 3,000 Allied aircraft arrive over the northern port. They drop 9,000 tons of high explosives. The resulting firestorm reaches an unimaginable 800 degrees Celsius. 43,000 people perish. 250,000 residential homes vanish into thick black smoke in exactly 8 days. Nuremberg, the undisputed architectural jewel of the Middle Ages, the city of timber-framed perfection. On January 20, 1945, 521 British bombers arrive. In exactly 1 single hour, 90% of the old town is vaporized. 10 million cubic meters of thick rubble clog the ancient streets. The physical medieval history is permanently severed. Dresden, known globally as the Florence on the Elbe, February 13, 1945, 722 heavy bombers strike the cultural capital. 3,900 tons of high explosives and incendiary devices ignite the center. 25,000 citizens die in the flames. 15 square miles of pristine centuries-old Baroque architecture are reduced instantly to white ash. Frankfurt am Main, the absolute largest medieval timber-framed old town in Central Europe. Over 2,000 historic houses tightly packed together. On March 20, 1944, a single massive firestorm wipes out 1,000 years of architectural evolution in under an hour. Würzburg, March 16, 1945. 90% of the city center burns completely to the ground in 20 minutes. 226 Lancaster bombers deliver absolute devastation. The magnificent residence of Prince Bishops utterly gutted. By the end of World War II, 80% of all major German urban centers are totally erased. 600,000 apartments in Berlin are totally destroyed. Nationwide, an estimated 400 million cubic meters of heavy rubble blanket the country. The ancient history you see today did not survive this. It burned, it shattered. The immediate survival of these cities fell directly to the Trümmerfrauen, the rubble women. Between 1945 and 1946, thousands of women clear millions of bricks completely by hand. They chip away hardened mortar, they stack the surviving stones. They literally sift through the radioactive ashes of their own heritage. You walk through these cities today, marveling at the 14th century walls, marveling at the 15th century churches, but the timeline was brutally, violently interrupted. The physical past was annihilated. It takes 20 minutes and 226 bombers to erase a city. It takes billions of euros and decades of stubborn psychological defiance to bring it back. Return to Dresden, the Frauenkirche, the Church of Our Lady, officially completed in 1743, a massive 12,000-ton sandstone dome dominating the Saxon skyline. In February 1945, it collapses completely under 1,000 degrees of heat. For exactly 50 years, it remains a dark 13-meter-high mountain of collapsed rock in the center of the city. A deliberate war memorial left untouched by the East German government. Then, 1994, the resurrection formally begins. Not as a museum project, but as a desperate psychological need to heal the urban scar. It costs exactly 180 million euros. Two-thirds of this massive budget is funded directly by private global donations. Architects use advanced 3D computer modeling to locate the exact original position of the scattered stones. 3,800 heavily scorched, blackened sandstone blocks are successfully salvaged from the debris. Look closely at the church facade today, officially completed in 2005. It is a striking, undeniable mosaic. The dark, charred stones are the original brutal scars of 1945. The bright golden stones are the new flesh. A literal 90-meter-tall map of trauma and recovery built directly into the architecture. Frankfurt refuses to accept its permanent loss. The Romerberg Square flattened in 1944, rebuilt only partially in the 1980s. But that was not enough. Between 2012 and 2018, the city launches the highly ambitious Dom Rome project. They bulldoze a massive 1970s concrete technical hall right in the city center. They spend 200 million euros to reconstruct 35 historical buildings from absolute scratch. They use original medieval blueprints discovered in archives. They import specialized red sandstone directly from the main river valley. Artisans carve the oak timber exactly as craftsmen did in the 15th century, a 200 million euro injection to buy back a stolen medieval identity. The grandest, most expensive defiance sits in the capital, the Berliner Schloss, The Royal Palace of Prussia, severely damaged in 1945, dynamited and completely wiped off the map by the East German regime in 1950, replaced decades later by the Palast der Republik, a massive copper-tinted socialist parliament building. In 2006, the United German government makes a radical, highly controversial decision: demolish the socialist parliament entirely, rebuild the Prussian palace. The new foundation stone drops in 2013. The Humboldt Forum is born. The final cost? A staggering 680 million euros. 105 million euros of that sum is strictly collected from private donors just to reconstruct the highly ornate Baroque exterior. 3,000 highly specialized sculptors and artisans are hired for the job. They carve fresh, raw Polish sandstone. They meticulously recreate 2,800 historic sculptures and architectural details. The building officially opens to the public in 2020, a highly advanced 21st century concrete core wrapped perfectly in a flawless billion-dollar 18th century illusion. Munich performs the exact same miracle. The Munich Residence, the largest city palace in Germany. 130 highly decorated rooms, severely bombed and burned out. It takes 40 years of continuous, relentless state funding to restore the antiquarium hall to its vibrant Renaissance glory. This is not historical preservation. Preservation fundamentally implies the building survived the fire. This is an act of sheer psychological defiance, a nation meticulously rebuilding its shattered soul from the ground up, stone by newly cut stone. The true wonder is not how many centuries these structures have stood. The true wonder is the stubborn billion-euro refusal to let them die. Do not just admire the architecture, admire the absolute resilience. Zoom into the quiet countryside, a perfectly still village, half-timbered houses lined up flawlessly along a narrow street, freshly painted wooden shutters, bright red geraniums blooming silently in flower boxes hanging from the windows, a narrow cobblestone path winding slowly past a local bakery, an elderly man walking a dog. Total peace, the absolute undisputed European pastoral dream. Pause. 3 seconds of silence. Do not be fooled. This is not a peaceful retreat from the modern world. This is an aggressive, globally dominant monopoly node. Welcome to the Mittelstand, the brutal, silent backbone of the national economy. While the international financial press obsessively tracks megabrands like BMW in Munich or Siemens in Berlin, the real untouchable industrial power hides deep in the countryside. The Mittelstand comprises a staggering 99% of all German companies. They employ nearly 60% of the entire national workforce. They do not want international fame. They do not seek glamorous magazine covers. They want total, unchallenged global market share. Look closely at the map of Baden-Württemberg. Deep in the thick pine forests of the Black Forest lies the town of Schwanau, population 700, surrounded by quiet cornfields and winding rural roads. You expect to find cuckoo clocks here. You expect wood carvers. Instead, you find Herrenknecht, a privately owned, highly specialized manufacturing titan. They produce the absolute largest tunnel boring machines on Earth. Massive underground mechanical worms machines weighing upwards of 4,000 tons, cutting shields measuring 19 meters across. When Switzerland needed to drill the Gotthard Base Tunnel, the longest and deepest railway tunnel in the world, stretching exactly 57 kilometers straight through the solid granite of the Alps, they called Schwanau. When London excavated the earth for the massive £19 billion Crossrail project, they lowered Herrenknecht machines deep beneath the Thames. When Istanbul connected Europe to Asia straight under the Bosphorus Strait via the Eurasia Tunnel, enduring massive water pressure, this tiny village supplied the drill. Herrenknecht holds an estimated 70% of the entire global market share in mechanized tunneling technology. They generate over 1.2 billion euros in annual revenue. They command a workforce of 5,000 highly trained employees, completely controlled from a rural village. They manufacture the colossal cutter heads in Schwanau, load them onto heavy transport barges on the Rhine River, and ship them to megacities across Asia, the Americas, and Europe. Why stay in the village? Unbreakable loyalty. The workforce lives directly in the surrounding valleys. Generations of highly specialized mechanical engineers stay strictly in Schwanau. They train their children here. The local vocational schools feed young apprentices directly onto the Herantnecht factory floor. It is a closed, perfectly optimized, self-sustaining talent loop. They completely dominate global infrastructure without ever relocating a single executive office to a glass skyscraper in Frankfurt. Drive 100 kilometers east, the town of Winnenden. Population, 28,000. It looks like a standard sleepy suburban district. It is the global headquarters of Kerker. You see their bright yellow high-pressure washers sitting in driveways in California. You see their industrial cleaning vehicles sweeping the streets of Tokyo. You see them washing the colossal stone faces of Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. You see them carefully blasting decades of grime off the colonnades of St. Peter's Square in the Vatican. Kercher generated 3.16 billion euros in revenue in 2022. They operate 150 subsidiaries across 78 different countries. They employ over 15,000 people globally. Every single major strategic decision flows directly from Winnenden. This is the exact definition of a hidden champion, a corporate predator ranking in the top 3 of its global market or number 1 on its respective continent, yet remaining completely unknown to the general public. Germany currently houses over 1,300 of these specific hyper-focused entities, more than any other country on the planet. Move sharply north, the state of Lower Saxony, the quiet town of Holzminden, population 20,000, sat quietly on the winding banks of the Weser River, a geographic location you will never find in a standard tourist guidebook, but you interact with the chemical output of Holzminden every single day of your life. This town houses Symrise, a towering global titan in the highly secretive flavor and fragrance industry. They do not sell products directly to consumers. They sell the complex chemical formulas to the world's biggest food and cosmetics corporations. They manufacture over 30,000 different synthetic products. When you taste a specific highly addictive vanilla note in your mass-produced American ice cream, it likely originates in a Holzminden laboratory. When you buy a luxury French perfume in a high-end Paris boutique, the vital synthetic scent molecules were probably synthesized here on the Weser River. Symrise produces massive quantities of synthetic menthol for global toothpaste brands. They engineer the exact barbecue crunch flavor for international potato chip conglomerates. They supply the global pet food industry with highly engineered nutritional additives. The roots run incredibly deep. In 1874, 2 chemists in Holzminden successfully synthesized vanillin from tree bark, the very first time humanity artificially recreated the vanilla flavor. The town has held a global monopoly on taste ever since. In 2022, Symrise reported over 4.6 billion euros in global sales. They firmly control roughly 10% of the entire global market for flavors and fragrances, a top-tier DAX-listed corporate behemoth operating entirely out of a rural farming region. This extreme rural isolation is a deliberate, highly calculated defensive strategy. In a major tech hub like Berlin or London, software engineers jump from company to company every 2 years. In Holzminden, the employee turnover rate drops to nearly 0%. The highly classified corporate knowledge, the secret chemical formulas, and the specialized manufacturing techniques stay securely locked inside the village borders. Look closely at Stein, Bavaria, a small municipality of just 14,000 residents. It holds the global headquarters of Faber-Castell, the undisputed largest manufacturer of wood-cased pencils on the planet. They produce a staggering 2 billion wooden pencils every single year. They have operated from the exact same rural estate since 1761. To protect their global supply chain from massive market fluctuations, they own and manage 10,000 hectares of pine forests in Brazil. They plant 300,000 new tree seedlings every year. A completely vertically integrated global empire, commanded by the 8th generation of the exact same family, sitting quietly in a Bavarian village. Look at Zürndorf, population 25,000, the birthplace and absolute command center of Playmobil. Over 3 billion plastic figures manufactured and shipped globally from a quiet Franconian town since 1974. Look at Hasewinkel in North Rhine-Westphalia, population 30,000, home to Claas, a massive globally feared manufacturer of heavy agricultural machinery. Their colossal Lexion combine harvesters completely dominate wheat fields in Kansas. They harvest massive soy farms in Brazil. They cut through enormous agricultural tracts in Ukraine. class pulls in nearly 5 billion euros annually. They employ 12,000 people. They operate massive factories in Omaha, Nebraska and Chandigarh, India. The orders come strictly from Harsey Winkle. The rustic aesthetic of the European village is a perfect, flawless camouflage. Foreign competitors consistently underestimate these rural headquarters. They wrongly assume that heavy innovation and global market domination only happen in massive glass skyscrapers in Silicon Valley, London or Shanghai. They are completely, mathematically wrong. The German countryside is not a living museum. It is a highly lethal, globally connected industrial park. The sleepy timber-framed house with the red geraniums is just the reception lobby. The real heavy lifting happens in the massive, highly automated, billion-euro production halls hidden directly behind the tall cornfields. The village is quietly, efficiently, and ruthlessly running the world. In 1956, the Ruhr Valley extracted a staggering 124 million tons of hard coal in a single 12-month period, a terrifying soot-stained industrial monolith. This was not a landscape of green alpine valleys. It was a 4,400 square kilometer machine, the undisputed beating heart of the 20th century European economy. Deep underground, nearly 500,000 miners hacked away at the heavy carbon seams. Above ground, colossal blast furnaces roared continuously. The massive Krupp steelworks in Essen melted iron day and night. The sky over Dortmund, Bochum and Duisburg burned a constant toxic orange. A thick, suffocating smog blanketed the streets entirely. Housewives famously complained that white laundry hung outside in Gelsenkirchen would turn completely black within 2 hours. This valley single-handedly forged the Wirtschaftswunder, the legendary post-war economic miracle. The coal mined here fired the massive power plants. The heavy steel forged here built the millions of Volkswagen Beetles rolling out of Wolfsburg. It constructed the colossal cargo ships leaving the port of Hamburg. It poured the reinforced concrete for the towering bank headquarters rising quickly in Frankfurt. The Ruhr Valley bled black so the rest of the nation could thrive. The natural environment was utterly destroyed in the process. The River Emscher was literally declared an open, biologically dead sewer in the early 1900s. A highly engineered, concrete-lined drainage ditch carrying the toxic chemical runoff of millions of citizens and thousands of factories directly into the Rhine. No fish, no plants, just pure, unfiltered industrial waste, but the golden age of heavy fossil fuel dominance possessed a brutal expiration date. The global energy market shifted violently. Cheaper, easily accessible coal flooded in from Colombia and Australia. The heavy, unyielding German coal seams ran too deep. They became too dangerous, too hot, and entirely economically suicidal to extract. The agonizing industrial decline began rapidly in the late 1960s. The massive steel conglomerates faced harsh financial realities. Thyssen and Krupp, once bitter century-old rivals, were forced into a desperate multi-billion-euro merger in 1999 just to survive the global bleed. Hundreds of deep mining pits shut down entirely. The towering 50-meter-high winding towers fell completely silent. The massive conveyor belts stopped running. Unemployment in heavily reliant cities like Gelsenkirchen and Herne skyrocketed past 15%. A catastrophic demographic collapse threatened the entire 4,400 square kilometer zone. To leave a colossal, heavily toxic industrial landscape to simply rot is a national death sentence. The earth was violently scarred. The groundwater was severely poisoned. The sheer volume of abandoned steel and concrete left behind could fill entire modern megacities. The financial liability was terrifying. Even today, the federal government pays approximately 220 million euros every single year in Ewigkeitskosten. Eternity costs, massive continuous water pumps running 24 hours a day to prevent the heavily mined Ruhr region from literally sinking and flooding with highly toxic groundwater. The government did not abandon the disaster zone. They initiated a radical, agonizingly expensive metamorphosis, a complete forced pivot away from heavy carbon reliance. The state of North Rhine-Westphalia poured massive subsidies into a brutal structural transition. They did not dynamite the rusting titans. They weaponized them for a completely new era. The transition was painful, costing tens of thousands of secure union jobs. The enormous gasometer in Oberhausen, a colossal iron cylinder holding 347,000 cubic meters of highly explosive blast furnace gas, was completely emptied and secured. The gigantic ThyssenKrupp steel mill in Duisburg-Bruchhausen, a sprawling site spanning nearly 10 square kilometers, began deliberately shutting down its oldest, most polluting blast furnaces. The raw, deafening noise of the industrial forge was abruptly replaced by silence. An entire massive workforce, generations of proud coal miners and steelworkers, had to be completely retrained for a post-industrial reality. The federal government mobilized a staggering €40 billion transition fund specifically to prevent the complete economic collapse of the coal-producing regions. The absolute end of the deep fossil era was heavily subsidized, desperately painful, and firmly finalized at 11:18 a.m. on December 21, 2018. In 2001, UNESCO officially declared the massive Zeke-Zollverein coal mine complex in Essen a World Heritage Site. A monumental shift in global perception, a highly toxic, heavily polluting coal mine elevated to the exact same cultural status as the pyramids of Giza or the Taj Mahal. Zeke-Zollverein was once the absolute largest and most productive hard coal mine in the world. It pumped out 8,000 tons of coal every single day. Today, its colossal Bauhaus-style winding tower, Shaft 12, draws 1.5 million visitors annually. The massive boiler house now holds the Red Dot Design Museum. The towering coking plant, which once baked coal at a blistering 1,000 degrees Celsius, now serves as a massive illuminated ice skating rink in the winter. This is not an isolated architectural art project. It is a calculated multi-billion euro regional survival strategy. Drive slightly west to the Landschaftspark Duisburg Nord, a 200-hectare former Thyssen steel mill. The gigantic blast furnaces were not torn down. They were structurally stabilized. Today, scuba divers train deep inside the massive flooded gasometer holding 20,000 cubic meters of water. Alpine climbers scale the sheer concrete walls of the former ore storage bunkers. The toxic industrial wasteland was completely, successfully reprogrammed. Remember the pristine, deep green alpine valleys and flawless nature from the very beginning of our journey? The truth is, much of the nature you see today in the highly populated West is entirely synthetic, a highly engineered, massively expensive reclamation. Take the Emscher River, the open, biologically dead sewer of the 20th century. In 1992, the government launched the Emscher Renaturation Project, a masterstroke of extreme civil engineering. Over a period of exactly 30 years, they invested an astonishing €5.3 billion. They built 400 kilometers of deep underground subterranean concrete tunnels to catch the toxic wastewater before it hit the surface. They systematically tore out the heavy concrete banks of the river. By 2022, the Emscher flowed completely clean for the first time in over 150 years. Trout and kingfishers returned rapidly to a river that once literally ran black with industrial poison. The lush green nature here is a deliberate €5 billion human invention. But the physical greening of the ruins is only the visual surface of a much harsher economic reality. The Energiewende, the grand, heavily publicized transition to renewable energy. The nation is forcibly unplugging the very machine that built its supreme wealth, shutting down the remaining active lignite coal mines in the Hambach forest, shutting down the massive nuclear reactors, with the final 3 plants officially going offline on April 15, 2023. This creates massive, violent economic friction. The legacy industrial machine is struggling heavily to pivot. You cannot run a colossal, energy-hungry chemical plant like BASF in Ludwigshafen on variable solar power alone. Heavy industry demands stable, cheap, uninterrupted baseload power. The rapid transition to wind and solar has caused electricity prices for massive domestic manufacturers to spike drastically, directly threatening their global competitiveness. The government is desperately racing to build 10,000 kilometers of new high-voltage transmission lines to bring the raw wind power from the North Sea down to the hungry industrial south. The SuedLink cable project alone carries an estimated soaring cost of €10 billion. The transformation is not a smooth, triumphant march into a green future. It is a highly volatile, unbelievably expensive, and incredibly dangerous high-wire act. They are attempting to completely rebuild the engine of a massive sports car while it is driving at 200 kilometers per hour. By 245, this exact brutal industrial machine aims to hit a staggering zero-emission target, backed by a monumental €600 billion national investment plan. Look at the physical machinery, the 4,000-ton Herrenknecht tunnel borers sitting in Schwanau, the colossal Siemens Gamesa offshore wind turbines spinning violently in the North Sea, the billion-euro chemical vats brewing synthetic vanilla in Holzminden. They are absolute masterpieces of heavy engineering. They represent the pinnacle of human manufacturing. They are also completely useless without human operators, who will operate the highly complex machines of the Mittelstand in exactly 1 decade. The answer lies in a brutal, highly unforgiving mathematical countdown. Germany currently faces a severe, undeniable demographic cliff. The national median age officially sits at 45.7 years old, one of the absolute oldest populations on planet Earth. Only Japan and Italy currently rank older in major global economies. Look closely at the legendary baby boomer generation. Born rapidly between 1955 and 1964, they aggressively built the modern export empire. They engineered the post-war economic miracle. Today they are leaving the factory floors in massive, unprecedented waves. By 2036, exactly 12.9 million highly experienced workers will permanently exit the German labor market. That is nearly 30% of the entire currently active workforce. Millions of master mechanics, senior electrical engineers, and logistics experts vanishing directly into retirement. The domestic birth rate cannot possibly replace them. It hovers stubbornly around 1.5 children per woman, far below the 2.1 biological replacement level legally required to maintain a stable flat population. The arithmetic is completely ruthless. Every single year, the native workforce actively shrinks by hundreds of thousands of bodies. This triggers a terrifying cascading pension crisis. In 1962, exactly 6 actively working adults financially supported a single pensioner. By 2022, that critical ratio collapsed entirely to just 2.1 workers per pensioner. By 2030, the Federal Statistical Office formally projects it will plummet to an unsustainable 1.5. The immediate financial strain on the federal budget is immense. The national government already injects over €100 billion annually just to artificially stabilize the statutory pension insurance fund. A massive financial bleed that cannot continue indefinitely. The extreme shortage of skilled labor is no longer a theoretical future warning. It is a daily, crippling reality across all 16 federal states. The German Economic Institute in Cologne formally calculates an active, unfilled shortage of exactly 570,000 skilled workers right now. Look directly at the healthcare sector. Massive hospitals in North Rhine-Westphalia are forced to immediately close active intensive care beds. Not because they lack funding or advanced medical equipment, they simply lack the physical nursing staff to operate them. The German Hospital Federation states the country desperately needs 150,000 new nurses by 2025. Look at the critical logistics grid. The Federal Motor Transport Authority reports a devastating immediate shortage of 80,000 commercial truck drivers. The physical supply chains feeding the massive automotive factories are severely delayed. Look at the heavy construction industry. The Central Association of the German Construction Industry reports 30,000 entirely vacant positions for master builders, electricians, and heavy machinery operators. The €10 billion Swedlink high-voltage power cables cannot be laid if there are literally no hands to bury the copper in the dirt. The highly celebrated Mittelstand is actively choking on its own success. Small family-owned companies in rural Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg are forced to turn down highly lucrative global export contracts. Not because they lack raw materials, not because they lack financial capital, they simply lack the physical human beings to manufacture the orders. Go directly to Chemnitz, a major industrial hub in Saxony. The local Chamber of Commerce issues dire, public warnings. More than half of all regional industrial companies consider the severe lack of young apprentices their absolute biggest business risk. The traditional vocational schools, once overflowing with highly motivated young trainees, now struggle to fill their classrooms. Move to the deep south, the massive hospitality sector in Munich. During the 2023 Oktoberfest, enormous beer tents accommodating 10,000 people struggled desperately to find enough staff to carry the 1-liter glass mugs. Historic hotels operate at heavily reduced capacity simply because they cannot hire enough cleaning personnel. Look at the national rail operator, Deutsche Bahn. They urgently need to hire 25,000 new employees annually just to maintain basic train schedules. Train cancellations skyrocket not due to mechanical failures, but entirely due to missing train conductors and signal operators. There's only one mathematical solution to this absolute demographic collapse: mass, sustained, and highly targeted international migration. Walk down the streets of Kreuzberg in Berlin. It is not a quiet, traditional 19th century European neighborhood. It is a high-speed, volatile collision of global demographics. You hear Turkish, Arabic, English, and Spanish before you hear a single word of High German. Oranienstraße is tightly lined with Syrian bakeries, Turkish supermarkets, and international tech startups funded by global venture capital. This is not a cultural anomaly. This is the exact, undeniable reality of the future German workforce. Germany is no longer a homogeneous, closed nation. It is a massive, highly active demographic laboratory. Out of 84 million total residents, over 23.8 million currently have a direct migration background. That is nearly 29% of the entire national population. In major urban financial centers like Frankfurt am Main, that exact figure officially crosses the 50% mark. The Federal Employment Agency, headquartered in Nuremberg, does not deal in cultural romanticism. They deal exclusively in hard, unforgiving economic survival. Their official mandate is terrifyingly clear: to maintain the current gross domestic product. To keep the massive Mittelstand factories running, the country mathematically requires exactly 400,000 net immigrants every single year. They do not just need a general population increase. They desperately require highly skilled, specifically trained international labor, IT specialists recruited directly from Bangalore, heavy machinery operators moving from Warsaw, registered nurses flying in from Manila, mechanical engineers relocating from São Paulo. The German parliament, the Bundestag, realized the sheer gravity of this crisis. They passed the highly aggressive Skilled Immigration Act in 2023, a desperate, massive legislative push to violently slash bureaucratic red tape. They introduced the Opportunity Card, mimicking the highly efficient points-based immigration laws of Canada. They aggressively lowered minimum salary thresholds. They now allow foreign workers to arrive in Munich or Hamburg without immediate job offers just to hunt for local employment. Look at the massive Mercedes-Benz assembly plant in Sindelfingen. Over 35,000 employees work at this single facility. Walk the factory floor and you will find workers representing over 100 different nationalities. The massive German automotive sector, generating over 400 billion euros in annual revenue, would halt completely within 24 hours without its international workforce. The integration effort is a multi-billion euro industry itself. The federal government spends over 1 billion euros annually simply on mandatory integration and language courses for new arrivals, teaching complex German industrial vocabulary to Syrian engineers and Ukrainian technicians. The traditional, historic definition of national identity is breaking apart rapidly under the sheer weight of absolute economic necessity. A sleepy, half-timbered village in Lower Saxony cannot remain a closed historic community if the local Simrez chemical plant requires 500 new international researchers to maintain its billion-euro global monopoly. There is immense, undeniable social friction. Intense political debates rage fiercely inside the glass dome of the Reichstag in Berlin. Severe political tensions flare constantly in regional state elections in Thuringia and Saxony. The violent collision between a deep historical longing for a homogeneous past and the brutal mathematical requirement of a diverse, globalized future creates a highly volatile public atmosphere. But the heavy industrial machines do not care about political debates. The 4,000-ton Herandknecht tunnel borers in Schwanau demand operators. The 222-meter offshore wind turbines in the North Sea demand maintenance technicians. The critical hospital beds in Cologne demand nurses. The German economic engine must consume massive amounts of human capital to survive. And the domestic fuel tank is completely empty. Remember the picturesque postcard from the very beginning of our journey. The quiet alpine valleys, the leather trousers, the giant glass mugs of beer in Munich. Erase that image completely from your mind. You now know exactly what operates silently beneath that flawless tourist illusion. Germany is not a stagnant 19th century open-air museum frozen in time. It is an aggressively adapting, highly fragmented 1.5 trillion euro global export machine. In 2023 alone, this nation shipped over 156 billion euros worth of goods directly to the United States. It exported 97 billion euros in heavy machinery and chemicals to China. The quiet, half-timbered villages in the Black Forest do not just bake bread. They hold absolute untouchable global monopolies. The heavily decentralized 16 federal states act as a massive, synchronized financial shield against global market collapse. This country does not survive by remaining still. It survives by constantly, violently tearing itself down and rebuilding. This is not a new behavior. It is deeply embedded in the historical timeline. Look back at the absolute devastation of 1945, when 3,900 tons of high explosives erased the Baroque perfection of Dresden. They did not abandon the ashes. They spent 180 million euros decades later to meticulously reconstruct the Frauenkirche, turning a charred graveyard into a towering 90-meter psychological fortress. This is the exact same relentless pragmatism that drove the 14th century Hanseatic merchants. When the freezing northern coast lacked natural stone quarries, they did not surrender. They simply dug the raw clay, fired massive industrial kilns, and built 151-meter-tall brick Gothic cathedrals in Stralsund to aggressively assert their commercial dominance. They constantly engineered their way out of severe geographic and historical deficits. The wooden sailing cogs of medieval Rostock evolved directly into the massive 24,000 TEU container ships docking in Wilhelmshaven today. The toxic, coal-choked blast furnaces of the Ruhr Valley transformed directly into a 5.3 billion euro clean water renaturation project for the Emscher River. The nation is a perpetual, highly funded construction site. Why does this massive, painful metamorphosis matter to the rest of the world? Because this is the ultimate, high-stakes stress test for the entire global industrial economy. If the third largest economy on planet Earth cannot successfully transition to a post-carbon future, nobody else can. The stakes are quantified in hard, unforgiving numbers. By the exact year 2045, the federal government is legally bound to achieve absolute climate neutrality. This requires a monumental 600 billion euro national investment. They must completely unplug a highly lucrative legacy automotive and chemical sector while maintaining global market dominance. Massive corporations like BASF in Ludwigshafen must entirely reinvent how they consume raw energy. The government is currently racing to construct a 9,000-kilometer core hydrogen grid by 2032, costing an estimated 20 billion euros. They are attempting to rewrite the fundamental rules of heavy industry in real time. Simultaneously, they must solve an unprecedented human shortage. The mechanical hardware is perfect, but the biological operators are vanishing. The Federal Employment Agency demands the integration of 400,000 skilled international workers every single year, just to keep the Mittelstand factories running. The demographic clock ticks loudly and aggressively. By 2030, the ratio of active workers to pensioners will drop to a highly critical 1.5. Millions of highly experienced baby boomers will permanently exit the factory floors of Stuttgart and Munich. The survival of the entire European supply chain now depends directly on Syrian software engineers in Berlin, Indian mechanical specialists in Saxony, and Philippine nurses in North Rhine-Westphalia. The severe social friction is undeniable. The political debates inside the Reichstag are explosive. But the mathematical reality of survival outweighs all traditional nostalgia. Do not travel here just to consume the romanticized past. Do not book a flight searching for a perfectly preserved medieval fairy tale. Arrive to witness the extreme, raw friction of the present moment. Watch a colossal, heavy industrial giant fight desperately to secure its future in a rapidly changing world. Look at the towering Siemens offshore turbines spinning violently in the North Sea. Watch the silent, fully electric Mercedes-Benz assembly lines operating in Sindelfingen. This is the exact fleeting moment a historical powerhouse aggressively reshapes its entire destiny. By 2035, the internal combustion engine will be legally banned from new car sales across the entire European Union. When that final definitive deadline strikes, what kind of machine will this nation be?